UFOs. From man's earliest history, stories of visitors from the sky have been recorded by virtually every culture on Earth. But are these visitors real, or simply part of our own imagination? On this episode, join Tobias McGriff as he welcomes award-winning filmmaker James Fox to discuss his new projects and reveal what it's like to pursue one of the universe's greatest mysteries on this special edition of Supernatural Science.
In 1948, 1 year after the Roswell incident, the United States Air Force started official investigations to explore the UFO phenomenon known as Project Grudge and Sign. But 2 short years later, it would be closed, citing no discovery of credible evidence. In 1952, the projects would be revived again under a different name, and this time, they would be called Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book received over 12,000 UFO reports that were considered worthy of investigation, and after 17 years of carefully examining each case, Project Blue Book was closed, and the government's official stance was that it would no longer investigate the UFO question. The government made it clear to a curious public that there was no evidence indicating that any of the unidentified sightings were extraterrestrial. But what the government didn't publicize was that there were 701 cases that could never be closed or explained. You're about to hear my interview with award-winning filmmaker James Fox about his new film that explores those cases and his decision to post the largest reward ever offered for irrefutable proof of extraterrestrials. He'll give us unlimited access and never-before-shared stories about what it's like to explore the world of the UFO.
I said, oh my God, this plane's going to crash.
This thing came right across, north to south, of...
Incidentally, I was a private pilot, so I have some familiarity with the airspace.
It glided over my house, and there was absolutely no noise.
What I thought to be a kind of a boomerang shape.
Myself, my God, that's a wingspan. I've never seen anything like that.
They were reported by at least one commercial airline pilot.
It was humongous, that's all I can say.
James Fox, welcome to the program. Thanks for talking with me this afternoon. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm doing great.
You got big things in the works. 701 film that's coming up now?
Yes, and each time I embark on a new project, it is after clearly stating that I'm done with UFO films. I could take you back to each and every production dating back into the mid-'90s with UFO documentaries that I've made, and at the end of each one of them, several years of production, I've said, I'm done. I'm moving on to other things. I've got environmental issues. I've got other interests. And lo and behold, it comes back to bite me in the bum. So the last time I said that, I said, well, I think I'm done, but I'm not sure.
Well, you know, this is number 5 or number 6. What are we on now? You sold like 5 films, right?
Well, I did. See, it's tricky, actually, because I did UFO's 50 Years of Denial, which I sold. UFO's 50 Years of Denial, which I sold to Discovery Channel in '97, and then I did Out of the Blue, but I did 2 versions of Out of the Blue, and then we did the National Press Club, and we documented that whole scene, which I released in its raw form in 2007 with Leslie Kane, and then I did. I did a secondary version of Out of the Blue, and then I did I Know What I Saw. And now we're doing 701, so that technically it would be number 4, but you could consider it number 5. Okay, and I mean you're 28 years old, and you sell your first documentary. I mean on UFOs, like not on something that was considered I guess mainstream, something that would be like an environmental issue, for example. It wasn't as if you did compelling work on something that the whole world is thinking about. You sold a documentary on something that often gets swept under the rug. I mean, how does that feel at 28? Funny, actually, because when I embarked on it, close friends and family were like, well, you don't have a snowball's chance in hell. I think right. The words that they used fueled my fire even more, and that, ironically, that's pretty much the only aspect of my endurance that's anything different than anyone else out there, because there's so many people that are way better qualified to do what I do, but I just simply don't give up. And there are obstacles constantly thrown in your path. That's what it's all about. Finding out how to navigate your way around these obstacles and never take your eye off the prize. And no matter how difficult it becomes, and believe me, it becomes difficult. I can tell you with every production, things that I've encountered that might appear as a deal breaker for someone else, but I'm very tenacious, and that's probably my best asset, really. I didn't know what the hell I was doing when I started on my first production, and I probably still don't know what I'm doing today.
I mean, that seems to be people that are usually successful in any genre seem to have that attitude. But, I mean, how do you score those kinds of interviews? I mean, you had some heavy hitters. I mean, you got generals, governors. I mean, you got a lot of people willing to talk to you. How do you score something like that, your first go-around?
Well, it's funny because I remember in the 90s, I initially got a phone interview with Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell, and then eventually I got a on-camera interview with him, and I flew out to Florida to meet with him on that one. And I said, Dr. Mitchell, why did you grant me the interview? And he looked at me and he said, because you wouldn't go away.
You're getting people to interview about things that can actually hurt them for talking about, and have.
Yes, that's one of the big issues a lot of people don't realize. They say, oh, well, these people that are appearing in your films, the naysayers, they're just looking for, a quick claim to fame or just a minute in the limelight. And I said, my response to that is it couldn't be further from the truth. Trying to get someone to participate in a UFO documentary, usually the more credible witness they are, like ex-presidents and generals and colonels and admirals, people have no idea how many months, if not years, it's taken to secure those interviews. And it's gotten a little easier lately just because I've got a bit of a reputation in my films. They know that I'm not going to make fun of them or display them in an odd light. In my films, I think one of the reasons why they've been successful as they have, and I'd like to see them even more successful in the mainstream, is that I back up pretty much everything that we present with first-hand eyewitness testimony. We're not sitting there saying that aliens have landed and they're interacting with our presidents. We're just saying that there's clearly a physical phenomenon taking place that at times doesn't appear to have a terrestrial base explanation. So one can do the process of elimination to determine whether or not what it is. I mean, I think it's easier to do that than it is to do what it isn't. And then what are you left with? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Well, honestly, watching some of your films, I think some of those guys that are extremely credible, have kind of said that. I mean, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso, I mean, he basically confirmed that there was an alien crash at Roswell.
Yeah. Well, there's been lots of little, I wouldn't call them anecdotal, but it's more the preponderance of evidence. I wouldn't say that necessarily there's one single smoking gun. You got the true. There's a memo that's recently surfaced. It's actually surfaced initially. I think Bruce Maccabee initially got his hands on it back in the late 1970s. But that talks about it. It's sort of an internal memo within the FBI that someone said that there's an FBI agent saying that there's rumors circulating, quite credible rumors circulating that are several crashed discs in the New Mexico desert with alien bodies. You've got the J. Edgar Hoover memo where he talks about, the case in blank. It's difficult to determine what he says, where discs were recovered. The Army grabbed them and wouldn't let us have them for cursory examination. And you've got people like Philip Corso. Sure, there's been controversy with Philip Corso. I happen to have met him and sat with him and met his family and his grandchildren. And I was certainly convinced after my meeting with him that at the very least, he firmly believed what it was he was saying. He wasn't just making this stuff up. And he had a lot more at stake to lose than to gain. I don't think he made any money from that book, by the way, the day after Roswell. And there were a lot of inaccuracies in the book that I know that he was unhappy with, that he spoke out that people are trying to, base those discrepancies and discredit his testimony. But I know that he himself was not happy. They rushed the book to get it out in time for the 50th anniversary of the Roswell incident. So, but like I said, it's the preponderance of evidence. There are memos and statements and deathbed statements, and that all lead to something of non-terrestrial appears to have crashed in Roswell, near Roswell, New Mexico.
And that's that seems to be the iconic, emblem for the UFO movement for a lot of people that haven't digged a little deeper, and they're not aware of how much accentuating information that there is out there. Like, it seems to, all rise and fall on Roswell, and there's so much more that's going on. And when you chose to make documentaries, I mean, if you're going to make a documentary anyway, the fact that you chose the UFO subject, I mean, where does your passion come from that started you off with UFOs?
Well, quite honestly, when a very good high school friend of mine started talking about crashed discs and aliens recovered and UFOs whizzing around with impunity in our airspace, globally, I honestly thought he needed to up the dosage of whatever medication he was on. I thought he'd lost his mind. and I'm giving you the truncated version, but I eventually started to, look into it very reluctantly. And as soon as I scratched the surface, I realized there was a lot more going on behind the scenes than what we're, what we're being told. And the more I dug, the more I found, and the more I found, the more I dug. And people often ask me, why is it that I do what I do? Oh, you're that UFO guy, and my response to them is, hey, if Earth was being visited, would you like to know about it? I mean, just let's talk hypothetically for a minute. They say, my God, are you kidding me? It would be the most significant discovery of our time. My response is, well, I'm convinced it's happening.
And so really it was the strength of one person's conviction, a personal friend of yours, that really kind of got you on the trail of looking into the subject matter.
Yeah, and I did it reluctantly. And I remember when my father found out, he was a mainstream journalist. He was quadriplegic with multiple sclerosis. And I sort of, by default, became his secretary, his chauffeur, his nurse. And I would travel on assignment with him from everyone from Playboy to Sports Illustrated to Rolling Stone, Car and Driver magazine. We went around, we met with people like Dan Gurney, former race car driver.
Right, yeah.
And we met with Stephen Hawking, physicist, Cambridge, Gonville and Keys. And on a couple of occasions, actually. And so very mainstream stuff. And when I told him that I was starting to look into UFOs, I mean, he was like, you really need to reconsider what you're doing, son. It's a dead-end street. There's nothing to it. Please don't waste your life. I mean, he was really against it, and I think slowly he started to realize, first when I finished the first film without any support from family, and they were all thinking that I was nuts. I had family members from all over the place sending me letters because half my family's English, and they were sending me letters from abroad saying, your father tells me what you've been embarking on, please reconsider, that sort of thing. And then I sold it, and I think my father was rather shocked that I sold the first film to Discovery. And he still was very much on the fence. And then when I managed to secure an interview with Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper, who's an iconic figure of his generation, I brought him along with me. It was just down in Los Angeles, and my dad lived in San Francisco at the time, so I threw him in the van and we went down there and did the interview together. And he walked away from that interview, and I think that was it for him. It was a turning point where he said, why would this man, who's got everything to lose and nothing to gain, for free, grant me an interview and talk about these very unambiguous UFO encounters? Why would he do that if it wasn't true?
Well, and I totally agree, because, when I watch your films, Colonel Cooper, who, he obviously wasn't an icon of my generation, but he is so steadfast, he is so convincing, he's so unapologetic, he has no motivation to lie about it. And, your involvement in that, going back to the beginning with your friend, that speaks to the power of word of mouth, because on the strength of that one friend, you started reluctantly looking into this. And would you say that mainstream, like nowadays, as the sightings apparently seem to be becoming more frequent, would you say that the attitude has softened, but because somebody knows somebody's got a friend or a family member that tells them this is real, I experienced this?
That's funny you should say that, actually. I was just on, Larry King's got a new show called Larry King Now. It's an online thing, and he's doing quite well with it. And I was on with Tom DeLonge, Skeptic Magazine guy, Michael Shermer, and myself. And, Larry's going, I've covered this topic, for almost 50 years, and he's going, why the hell haven't I gotten to the bottom of this thing yet? And then he was kind of being somewhat tongue-in-cheek, and we went to a commercial break, and his wife was like, honey, what are you talking about? You remember my brother saw a flying saucer. He's in a band, and the whole bus saw it. They all saw this thing. It was right over the power lines, this flying saucer, this perfect disc. And he says, yeah, you're right, honey. That's a really interesting, very compelling story. And now that you mention it, Governor Simonton's story is really, really, really credible. And he mentioned off like 3 or 4 other people, President Carter, Governor Simonton, Cooper, and a handful of others. And he said, he simply couldn't dismiss their account. And I think that you'd be surprised when the cameras aren't rolling in mainstream. I've been on a lot of mainstream. I've been on with Anderson Cooper and a Nightline and Dateline and CNN a number of times. And, when the cameras aren't rolling, they're very intrigued by it all, like, God, tell me more, I went on the Today Show not too long ago. I actually went on a show in New York. It's online somewhere. If you Google preponderance of evidence, you guys could see the clip. But the interview went really well, and then after the interview, the guy pulled me aside, the anchorman, and he couldn't get enough of the information. He just wanted more, and he's like, wow, we got to keep in touch. We need to get you on again. And so I think that, there's a certain reluctance to confirm their beliefs on camera, but they're very, very curious and very, very curious when the cameras aren't rolling. But, once again, there's the typical knee-jerk response of, ridicule that seems to prevail in mainstream media. But I think that's starting to soften a little bit. I really do.
Well, I would agree with that. I think that it has softened quite a bit, and it's easier for people to come forward. And that leads me to my next point. You mentioned Governor Simonton in that list. And what Governor Simonton is best remembered for in the UFO circle is the stunt that he pulled at the press conference. And a lot of people got upset. And after it happened, he published a retraction. He was on, Your Next Film, and he talked about if he had it to do over, he wouldn't have done it the same way. But, I think that his position, he heard the question as a whole, and it's not, he's not remembered for the retraction. He's remembered for the offense. And so I think there's a responsibility there. And I also would like to ask you, you've spent time with him. Listen to his retraction when you had a chance to be there in the moment. Can you talk to me a little bit about the read that you got from him? I want to believe it's genuine. But there's still that part of me that can't help but struggle with the fact he's so good at, he's a professional politician. And a part of me wonders, was it political backpedaling because he realized how serious his constituents took the sightings, or is he being genuine? What you
Okay, well, when he granted me the interview, this is a good point you're bringing up here. When he granted me the interview, he had absolutely no intentions of having admitted seeing that UFO, okay? When I went to his house in Santa Barbara, all he was going to talk about was wanting to add a bit of levity to an otherwise mounting, I don't say pressure, but there were inquiries pouring in from all around the world. There was a flurry of activity and inquiries, and also mounting, as he put it, hysteria, on the brink of sort of hysteria in the state of Arizona. At the time, I wish he would have handled it differently, but he felt it was a need for some levity, and that's what all he was going to do is explain that to me. And when I was driving down to do the interview, a thought certainly popped in my mind. I thought to myself, well, gosh, who better than to pose the question to him, why the bleep did you do what you did, than one of his former constituents as well as a witness to the event. So I pulled the car over to the side of the road on a whim, and I called this woman Stacy Rhodes, and her and her daughter Emily saw the craft. They had one more person in the car over I-10 between Tucson and Phoenix, and they said if you opened up a newspaper, you could not block out this craft. It was so huge, and it flew very slowly over their car, and all the cars on the freeway were pulled over to the side of the road watching this thing. So I called her, and I said, Stacy, you're not going to believe who I'm going to interview right now. Who is it? I said, the former governor. Is there anything you'd like to say to him? She's like, you're goddamn right I would. I said, well, hold on a second. Let me pull out my pocket tape recorder, and I hit record, and I said, go for it, and she laid into him. She was furious. So I backed the tape up, and I, prepared it to hit him with this in the middle of the interview, and I waited till I got, a good portion of the interview over with, because I want to piss him off to the point where he's going to just tell me to go take a hike. 3/4 of the way through the interview, I said, "Oh, Governor Simonton, I've got a little something I'd like to present to you. It's from one of your former constituents as well as a witness to the event." And he kind of got uncomfortable, and I think he even said on camera, like, "Boy, it's been a while since I've been ambushed like this. Here we go." And I hit the play button.
Is this still a matter of ridicule to him after he came out on TV with his alien, making us all look a little foolish? We've all remained unwavering on our descriptions. A lot of evidence has been provided since then, and I'm wondering if he still feels this is a matter of ridicule or if he has taken a new stance on this.
And she just unleashes this tirade on him about the whole thing. How he let them out to dry. They voted him into office. How could they do this to him? None of their stories had changed over the years. It had been nearly 10 years at the time. How could he do that to them? And he really was deeply moved by the frustration and the anger and everything. And I saw him sitting in his chair, kind of squirming, and I could see that he had this internal debate that was going on. And right there on the spot, live on camera as it's rolling, he decides to come clean. That's what happened. I remember when he did it, I was literally pinching myself. I went back and made sure the damn tape was rolling and it was on record on the camera because I thought I couldn't believe what this guy was saying. But I can honestly tell you that was a very sincere, that he was getting this monkey off his chest after all these years, and he had no intention of revealing what he'd revealed. I pulled his wife aside later. His wife is one of the only people he told. And I said, can you tell me what happened? She said he heard about this thing. He went out to Squaw Peak at around 8:15 at night alone, which he's not supposed to leave alone. He was hearing either radio chatter or something that drew this thing to his attention. He got in his car, went out to Squaw Peak, got out, saw this thing, and when he came back to the house, she said it was as if he'd seen a ghost, and that was it, you know. And so I firmly believe that he saw whatever it was that was flying over. I mean, his location is perfect, the timing was perfect, his wife's testimony held up. I looked him both in the eyes. I knew that he had no intentions of, you know, revealing this stuff to me when I got there. And I can honestly say to you that if I had to put my life on it, one or the other, I would say that he was honestly telling the truth.
Well, that is a heavy statement. I have to tell you, when this first happened, and I actually remember when it actually happened in real time, the first thing that went through my head was, you know, fuck this guy. And he's the governor of the state of Arizona. He has an opportunity, you know, to be a tipping point and to really cause, you know, people to look at this question, you know, seriously. But I mean,
could you imagine had he not pulled that stunt and if he had told the truth as governor?
Yeah.
What would have happened?
Yeah, because
that could have been the impetus to push this over the edge and have some sort of disclosure. That was an opportunity unprecedented.
Exactly.
As far as I'm concerned. I mean, he had the state of Arizona behind him on this one. Other representatives, I think a senator saw this thing. I mean, people were pulling their cars over to the side of the road, and jaws dropped to the floor watching this huge craft fly overhead. I was in the depths. I was researching. I'd been to Phoenix many times in the 90s. I was livid at the governor for pulling that. I was cussing at the TV screen when it happened. And, you know, missed opportunity, golden opportunity. I mean, an opportunity unlike anything that's ever happened. And what, I mean, could you imagine? That could have been the tipping point.
Well, that's the whole thing, because when it happened, you know, I was set for that to be a tipping point, and I think a lot of people that were following it were. But I mean, that's the whole thing. When these guys get in a position where they have the opportunity, you know, to really make some change and be that agent for something that, you know, that matters, they always back away from it. And then we either have to wait for evidence to come out later to prove that they were, you know, lying and they did know something that was going on, or we wait for the deathbed confession. And, you know, both scenarios are, you know, unacceptable.
Yeah, you know, I just interviewed Colonel Bob Friend. Colonel Friend was head of Project Blue Book. All I could get him to admit on camera is that there's something real, and then it merits further scientific investigation, and there doesn't appear to be a terrestrial explanation for some of the more compelling cases.
Well, there seems to be this 5% qualification, the lack of sound, the speed, and the third one, which is the most intriguing to me, military interest. You know, he's a key figure in being able to not only witness to that, but he could be a key figure. Do you think he's hiding anything?
Well, I said to him, we were walking back to the car. We were at an airport in LA, smaller airport, not LAX. And there was a museum at the airport, and we were walking back to the car, and I had the camera rolling, but I was just like filming our shadows walking together. And he was still mic'd, and I said, you know, Colonel, I think deep down inside, you know the truth. And he jokingly said, I told you the truth, and it came from deep down inside. And we both had a really good laugh. But, you know, I said, you know what I want you to say. Why don't you just say it? You know what you believe. And he was he walked the very fine line of he would neither confirm nor deny. But there are other, like there's Colonel Coleman, who's head of Blue Book and overseeing Blue Book. And Colonel Coleman had an incredible sighting. He chased a flying saucer, I think it was in 1955, over Alabama. And he came within, I mean, very close to this thing, and it was so close and so low that it stirred up dust flying over the treetops. And then they put him, you know, in charge of Blue Book, certainly overseeing Blue Book. And I remember he said that, well, don't you think it would be a conflict of interest with me overseeing this project when I've clearly had an experience? And I guess evidently not. But the interesting thing is that this credible sighting that Colonel Coleman had in the B-25 never ended up in Blue Book files. It went somewhere else. Usually the better the case, you know, the more unambiguous the case was, the less likely it would be included into Project Blue Book files.
Well, that's a key statement within itself. The thinner the case, the more likely it is to end up in Project Blue Book. And even in those files, over 12,000 cases submitted, and there are 701 that couldn't be closed or explained. I mean, that's the point of your next film, the point of this podcast and the series that we're doing. And the caveat statement in this is that it wasn't because of a lack of data. They had plenty of data, and they still couldn't close 701 cases. And the Washington Tower case is a great example. 1952, they record a craft that's flying at speeds up to 7,000 miles an hour. And when you look at things that were man-made that could travel 7,000 miles an hour in 1952 in low Earth atmosphere, you come up with nothing. And those, the planes couldn't catch them.
They scrambled jets to intercept those objects. I mean, the pilot, they were playing cat and mouse with the pilots. I mean, those pilots are getting a visual. They're getting radar confirmation and visual confirmation. Those pilots were terrified.
And they're dancing around them.
The sightings, the Capitol sightings in 1952, I think it was in July, that triggered a response of the United States Air Force. Well, they, in uniform, General John Sanford actually made a statement to the United States. It's an incredible statement. Look it up. Google General John Sanford, 1952, for the Air Force. That's when I believe the Air Force was shitting in their pants. We got to get an explanation. That's when they brought on board, they assembled the Robertson panel. And the Robertson panel was a very prominent panel of scientists. Dr. Jalen Hynek was part of that panel. And that's when they said, what do we do? And I think there was an internal struggle going on where there was one side of people in the Air Force, let's disclose, and I think the other side was going, God, we can't. I think it's more of a question of what they don't know than what they did know. They asked the Robertson panel for, a solution. Robertson panel came, but let's just adopt this policy of blanket ridicule. Anyone who says they see one of these things, you laugh at them. And it was adopted in 1953, and it was a very effective campaign.
Well, taking it from that perspective, you're left with a situation where you have Project Blue Book, which is by all accounts the government's best effort to look at the UFO question. They only accept the thinnest of cases. They take in over 12,000, and they still can't close or explain 701 of them. And again, it's not because of a lack of data. And then as the witnesses become more frequent, more credible, the Robertson panel devises a solution that involves nothing more than blanket ridicule. So, I mean, and I wonder, after 4 films on UFOs and unequivocally showing that there is something else out there, talk to me a little bit about what 701 is going to do or try to do that the other films haven't done. I mean, are we just in a place where people can't hear it? And is 701, is that film just another way of looking at something that we've looked at many times before?
There's never been a film done on the UFO phenomenon that has penetrated an extremely large audience, other than the cable, History Channel, Discovery Channel, Learning Channel, Sci-Fi Channel, that sort of thing. There's never been a film theatrically released on the subject of UFOs. And I'm not talking about a film with actors and actresses. I'm talking about a documentary feature. And that is, funny enough, something that I tried to accomplish with I Know What I Saw, but I didn't have the budget, I didn't have the time, I didn't have the know-how, all of the above. And when I finished I Know What I Saw in late 2009, I remember being disappointed that I ended up selling it to A&E and then broadcast on History Channel, 2-hour special. And my father was like, oh, son, look what you did do, though. It's an amazing piece of work, blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, but I'm just preaching to the choir. I'm just going to have it broadcast out to a few million people on History Channel that, whatever. It's not. I just felt like I fell short of my goal. But I moved on to other things. And about 6 months ago, I was approached by a guy, and I'm working on a film right now on the BP oil spill called Pretty Slick. You can Google it. And I'm working on this film, and I get a call from Tracy Torme. He's a screenwriter out of Hollywood. He's done stuff like he worked on Contact, he worked on Intruders, the miniseries. He wrote Fire in the Sky, Carnival. He's done a bunch of mainstream stuff that people have either seen or heard of. And he said, gosh, I just saw your film. I Know What I Saw, and I was incredibly impressed, and call me. I really want to talk to you about a project. So we talked, and I ended up driving down to L.A. and spending the weekend with him. And he's like, my dream has always been to do something that's never been done. And I said, what's that? He goes, put a film on UFOs as credible as possible with the highest production values in theaters. And I said, well, you know what, Tracy, that's been my dream as well. Let's team up and let's do this. And And that's how it was born. You know, we both felt that neither one of us are remotely interested in creating another TV special. It's just, that couldn't be. I've done that. Mm-hmm. I needed to do something much bigger.
Right.
And that's when, you know, we decided to put our heads together and team up and do this. So this documentary film would have recreations like cinema-like. You know, we're talking multi-million-dollar budget here, and something I could never compete with in the past. And he's good at script writing. He's also very passionate about the UFO subject. He's very knowledgeable about the UFO subject. And we'd bring in some of the top researchers when we, you know, have cases that we present. You know, we you know, just like they do recreations in a documentary film, we would do a TV documentary. We would do recreations, but cinema-like. I mean, as if like think Close Encounters, but the real-life Close Encounters. You know, obviously when you're doing the recreations, obviously you have acts, but when you're not doing recreations, you have real witnesses, you have real evidence. So it's absolutely 100% accurate. Kind of like Fire in the Sky with Travis Walton, pretty accurate film. And it's just all about penetrating a much larger, much broader audience, global audience. And that has not been accomplished yet. And we both feel that it's time.
How many, when you do something like this, do you know in advance of how many like theaters this is going to end up in, the distribution?
Done properly, it would, you know, the sky's the limit. I mean, it's never been done before, so there's just all this speculation as to, but the sky would be the limit. I mean, the nice thing about UFOs is whether you believe in them or not, the very subject matter is sensational. It transcends politics. It transcends religion and borders. There's a fascination of it for it globally. So done properly, you know, the sky's the limit.
Well, you're right. And to your point about it being a sensational topic, what has recently provided you with national attention for the film has been the fact that in addition to releasing it, you are also offering a $100,000 reward for anyone that can prove or provide irrefutable proof of an extraterrestrial. So if you would tell everyone a little bit about that.
For that $100,000, we actually went back to our investor, and I haven't released this officially yet, but let's just say that we're up in the ante, because we know through the interviews I've done with both military and civilian people that the footage that was either captured officially, so let's say the Air Force was documenting launches of missiles at different areas, maybe White Sands or Vandenberg Air Force Base, or doing experiments at Edwards. Things have been captured on camera, and we've spoken to witnesses. We know the stuff exists if they're to be believed, and I have no reason to think that they wouldn't be telling the truth. We know there's footage out there, official footage, and we know there's civilians that shot footage that was confiscated by some agency of our government. So we know there's stuff out there. There's risk involved with people handing this stuff over. So we wanted to compensate, put enough of a compensation on there to, you know, sort of commensurate with the level of risk involved with giving us over the footage. So I've actually been renegotiating that fee, that reward, to a much higher figure, which we're going to be announcing in about a week or so.
At $100,000.
By the way, we already have about 90 bits that we're sifting through slowly right now.
Well, that was my next question. I was going to ask you how many folks you had submitting things, and I'm guessing you probably, as you sift through it, you have to throw out, you know.
Oh yeah, we know that 99% of it's going to be complete garbage. We're very aware of that.
Yeah.
And we're also very aware of the fact that people are going to be probably creating stuff in their basement on super, you know, computers with the latest technology and modeling and all that stuff. We're bringing on board some people that are the top-notch special effects people, and we're trying our best, and we're going to continue to do our best to sift through this stuff. And it's actually, we've had to hire people, bring people on board just for that job alone. So.
Well, you know, seeing someone that has your experience in the field, and you're willing to put money on the table, you're going back to get some more. You know, is there something that you have, or, you know, with the interviews and the experiences that you've had, is there, you know, something that you have in mind that's out there that you're trying to fish out? I mean, in your opinion, what would be the holy grail to come out of all this?
We know there's footage that was taken in the 50s, 60s, 70s, official footage, some of which we're targeting, that we're going after. That would, in my view, be the holy grail if we got a landing at Edwards at circa 1950-something, 2 or 3, which I'm pretty convinced that exists. There's missile launches that I've heard of being tracked by disc-shaped craft traveling at extremely high rates of speed, taken with telephoto lenses, that sort of thing. So we know this stuff's out there, and that's why we up the ante, and hopefully that's ideally getting hold of some archive footage, official Air Force footage would be that would be the ultimate holy grail of footage. But we're putting it out there. We drop the hook in the water and we're seeing what we're going to pull up.
Is there a clearly defined scope or conditions that it would take to meet that are published, that it would take to satisfy you and your folks when you're looking at this to say, okay, yeah, we'll give you the money?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that obviously points of reference, something that's obviously in focus, preferably daylight, and official, if it's official footage. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we wouldn't consider someone that shot footage in 1997 of the large craft over Phoenix. If something was produced that looked like it was shot on a video camera back in 1997 that clearly showed a boomerang-shaped craft up to a mile across, wingtip to wingtip, flying over an area that could be analyzed to determine its authenticity. Do you know what I mean? Like, for instance, a mountain peak or whatever,
right,
which I'm pretty convinced exists, then that very well could win. I mean, there were guys that scrambled F-16s, from what I understand, to intercept that large craft. I'm sure there was gun cam footage in those.
To your point, though, if someone does have that kind of footage, $100,000 isn't going to cut it.
No, exactly. And that's the thing is, even at the time, I was, I did a couple of radio interviews, and I said, look, if you feel you have this footage and you feel that it's worth a lot more than that, don't let that price, the dollar amount, discourage you from approaching us, because I'm sure that we could rally up, the appropriate compensation of funds. But I couldn't necessarily officially say, hey, look, we've renegotiated with our backer and we have a new amount. But now, in the very near future, I will be able to make that statement.
When is 701 going to come out?
It really depends on it looks like the full-blown funding for production will begin in a couple of weeks, and we've all been putting our ducks in the row and preparing for a pretty rigorous shooting schedule. But it's very difficult to determine. There's all sorts of things that could slow us up. So I think if in an ideal world, a year and a half to 2 years, maybe sooner. It's really hard to say.
As you move into 701, which is by all indicators going to be your best work on the subject of UFOs, and after all of these interviews, all of these years, 4 films into this, even if you haven't had your own sighting, the sheer exposure that you've had, I'm sure has caused you to draw some conclusions about the UFO question. So to date, what is it that you are absolutely convinced of when it comes to the UFO question?
What I am convinced of today is that there's a physical phenomena. It's under intelligent control. These craft have the ability to fly rings around our fastest jets, and they are whizzing around with impunity in our airspace, and the government, not saying by any means that they're hostile, because if they were, they've exhibited a few displays of technology, sort of one could interpret as taking the matches out of the hands of a baby, when they're interacting with our nuclear capabilities,
Right,
our
exactly.
nuclear-tipped warheads and that sort of thing. You hear these stories told from these colonels and men in the field about these objects sending light rays down into the nuclear warhead or the nuclear bunkers and stuff like that. And I remember asking some military guys, well, gosh, what did you think when it was happening? He said, well, it kind of made me realize that maybe they're trying to tell us something.
Right, yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't be playing around with these things.
Or don't play with matches.
Exactly.
I think just knowing they could do it would be enough to probably send most of the public. The loss of autonomy is a thing that a lot of people fear. There's this dominator control mechanism in a lot of societies, especially governments. And, to think of something that can, as you said, like run rings around our fastest aircraft. I think knowing that that's there, even if their intentions weren't hostile, haven't there been studies done that have basically predicted there would probably be a collapse of civilization if we resoundingly found out that these things are real?
There have been, and I remember discussing this with 2 things I want to mention. One is that I put a challenge out a while ago for anyone out there who's on the fence or who thinks this is a bunch of hogwash to watch I Know What I Saw. Mm-hmm. And, I literally said this like 5-6 years ago. I don't know what it was, in 2009. I said, anybody out there who doesn't believe in this and thinks it's nothing more than swamp gas and errant missiles or whatever, to watch I Know What I Saw, and if they, at the end of it, if they really truly believe still that there was nothing to it, then I would give them a full refund. And I've never had to issue a refund with anyone. One of the reasons why I think this didn't get out, because like yourself, you've seen I Know What I Saw. You know, it's a piece of work I stand behind. I think the only thing that failed us was the distribution. The evidence is already out there. It just hasn't gotten the exposure it deserves. Do you know what I mean?
No, I know exactly what you mean. And that presents, I think, a new question or a new issue. If you get the mass penetration that you're going for, and by all accounts it looks like you will, you can get the public's attention. But historically, you know, there's case after case and example after example that when you get the public's attention, you are probably also going to get the government's attention if it really has the desired, you know, effect that you want it to. And so have you given any consideration to how you are going to handle that? Have you given any consideration to how you intend to portray the government in the film? And, you know, has that conversation taken place with you and the rest of the folks involved in the project?
Well, that's one of the conversations we've been having internally with the production of this next film, 701, and that is, let's take a position that doesn't necessarily do any finger pointing, that justifies in some respects a level of secrecy, and not necessarily, you know, accusing the government of this massive cover-up. That there was reasons for it at the time, and yet those reasons no longer apply, and that done properly, we strongly feel that this could even encourage the government to make a strong statement, and that we forgive them for the level of secrecy over the years, and that it wasn't done in a sinister way. It was done more of the fact of what they didn't know, and maybe in 1952 they decided a very honest investigation to determine the origin and the intentions of these objects, of these, UFOs. And maybe here we are 60-plus years later, and we're no closer to the truth now than we are then. In other words, they realize they're real. They realize it doesn't appear to be anything man-made. They're under intelligent control, clearly. And there are, at times beings spotted, but maybe they don't have the answers that they were hoping to have.
Is there any government that's doing it right? I mean, is there any place on earth that's looking at this in a way that you see as beneficial?
Well, I was down in Brazil last year, and I met with a General José Carlos Pereira, Brazilian Air Force. And he was active. He was quasi-active. He was on his way to retirement, but he's still active. And he gave an incredible interview, talked about the reality of UFOs and talked about a few cases that had happened in Brazil. And I said to the camera crew afterwards, do you guys realize what we just experienced? This would never happen in the United States of America. Sure, you can get retired guys, but not active. And this is opening up in Chile. France has been opening up their files. England's opening up their files. Canada has been opening up some of their files. Maybe the Americans have a lot more to hide, but I tell you, there's a movement that's been happening since 2006, 2007, that, it's a slow, like I asked the question to former guy at the Ministry of Defense, Nick Pope, do you anticipate any level of disclosure? He said, yeah, don't think of it as disclosure happening with a big D. Think of disclosure with a small d. So maybe they're on a smaller level, slowly, this stuff's starting to get out. And maybe with the film 701, provided we don't do any too much finger pointing, providing we give some level of justification for the secrecy all these years, maybe they'll come out and maybe they'll disclose what they do know.
Excellent. Well, James Fox, thank you for joining us. I appreciate your time and appreciate you being with us, and we definitely look forward to the film. And as far as your previous films, is that something we can get on demand, like Amazon.com?
Yeah, I've got. You can either try to YouTube them, or if you want to buy some DVDs, you can go to I Know What I Saw, themovie.com. Just Google I Know What I Saw, and I've got all 4 DVDs, all my films I ever made on the subject of UFOs, including Out of the Blue, lots of outtakes, I Know What I Saw, 50 Years of Denial, and the unedited version of the National Press Club event, which we did in 2007 with Leslie Kane. So those are all, and I'm selling them for, I think it's a little over $9 each. So $39, not with no tax and no shipping fees. And if you can't afford it, I encourage you to go out and look for them free online too. Either way, you should get the information. I never wanted money to be the preventative factor for people seeing this stuff. But if you like what you see and you can support it, get some DVDs too.
Well, James, thanks so much for being on the program. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and it's always an inspiration to hear what you're up to. And I know that you're on a really crazy shooting schedule right now. You've got 2, movies in the works, and, to take an hour out is a big commitment. But I appreciate you coming on and sharing with us, what's going on behind the scenes, giving us a taste of what it's like to make documentary films, and also about something as interesting as the UFO question. So I really appreciate you doing that for us.
I really enjoyed it.
All right, folks, that was James Fox. If you're not familiar with his work, you really should be. In terms of UFO documentary filmmaking, he is, in my opinion, the most credible guy out there. He is featured nationally quite often on every show from Anderson Cooper to the Today Show to Larry King, and they feature him for that very reason. They know that they can expect solid, even-toned research, and you heard him. If you can't afford the DVDs, look for it for free online. He's got 4 films that are out there for you to look at in anticipation for his upcoming film 701. And for someone that's willing to give away their work, that has put this much effort into it over the period of time that he has done it, that is, in my opinion, about as sincere and as transparent as you could possibly get. So take him up on his challenge. Check out the information. Check out what he has to say and show you, and decide for yourself. And if you want a taste of what you can expect, I leave you with this. This is Captain Ray Breuer, who witnessed an object over a mile wide as he was flying over the Channel Islands region of the English Channel, and it was also witnessed by the passengers on board. So I will leave you with that. This has been Supernatural Science. I am your host, Tobias McGriff.
Straight ahead, very flat platform. We're looking at it through binoculars as we speak.
544, Roger. I do have a primary contact now, very faint primary contact, just to the left, probably 11 o'clock this time, in a range of about 4 trap miles.
Roger. I've got a definite contact by 12 o'clock, very bright yellow object looking, well, like a cigar.
Jersey Bladder 832, the zone asked us to look if we could see an object which is being seen by A-line at the moment. We've got something about 8 o'clock resembling the description.
Roger, and 832, Roger. What range would you estimate that target?
Around about the similar range to Albany from us now.
Well, looking through binoculars as I am now, there's a second one just appeared behind the first one from where I am. Roger, 544, just confirming that all the passengers can see this aircraft. I've got the island visual. It's dead ahead. Can't say how far, probably 5 miles, but it's staying the same size. Looks to be off the northwest coast of Albany.
A-line 544, Roger, would you like descent?
Please, I better head go down, I think.
A-line 544, Roger, descent to altitude 2,000 feet at QNH 1021.
2,000 feet, 1.